Hello to everyone celebrating Nowruz across the United States and in countries around the world. Nowruz Mubarak. For thousands of years, this has been a time to gather with family and friends and welcome a new spring and a new year. Last week, my wife Michelle helped mark Nowruz here at the White House. It was a celebration of the vibrant cultures, food, music, and friendship of our many diaspora communities who make extraordinary contributions every day here in the United States. We even created our own Haftzim, representing our hopes for the new year. This year, that includes our hopes for progress between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the international community, including the United States.
Okay, boy, I tell you, I really hope for progress as well, but I just don't see it coming. You know, I really see us making some sort of deal, a bad deal with Iran, and Iran eventually getting a nuclear weapon. Hello, you're listening to The Resistance. This is Forrest Wilson. Our lines are open, 904-222-TALK, 904-222-8255. I hope you call in and weigh in on this important subject, because I think that Iran ultimately is going to get a nuclear weapon out of this deal. I haven't heard anything from the administration addressing the American people on the need for a deal that prevents conclusively Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. I want you to listen to something else here. This is more of President Obama's address to the Iranian people, which, by the way, probably didn't even hear this unless they went on YouTube with all the censorship in Iran. That is a totalitarian state. They've been at war with us since the late 70s under the other incompetent, James Carter. Play clip 2, will you?
Our negotiations have made progress, but gaps remain. And there are people in both our countries and beyond who oppose a diplomatic resolution. My message to you, the people of Iran, is that together we have to speak up for the future we seek.
The people aren't going to hear the message, but keep going.
Countries should be able to resolve this issue peacefully with diplomacy. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has issued a fatwa against the development of nuclear weapons.
Okay, stop right there. Stop right there. A fatwa against the development of nuclear weapons. You know, according to the Islamic Supreme Council, you might compare a fatwa to the legal ruling of a high court or the Supreme Court, depending upon the authority of the mufti behind it. However, a fatwa is not binding, as is the verdict of the secular courts. While correct and applicable to all members of the Muslim faith, the fatwa is optional for the individual to respect or not respect. In other words, just because he issues a fatwa doesn't mean he has to follow it. Can we continue with the clip? Or did you kill it? You can't go back. Okay, anyways. He goes on to say, President Rouhani, also someone who can't be trusted. This man was in exile with the former Ayatollah Khomeini, who started this Islamic revolution. And guess who knows this? Our supreme leader's right-hand woman. That's right, Valerie Jarrett. That woman was born in Shiraz, Iran, speaks Farsi, and advised the president on 3 occasions not to issue the kill order against Osama bin Laden. 3 times. She denied our president the advice to get Osama bin Laden, the perpetrator, in the attack on the World Trade Center. By the way, 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudis, and they were here illegally, many of them on expired student visas, but I guess they didn't figure they could just walk across the border. I mean, how can you have confidence in these negotiations with Iran? Do you have any confidence? These lines are still open if you want to call in and weigh in, 904-222-TALK, 904-222-8255. And I'm curious, do you have any confidence in an agreement with Iran that will prevent them from attaining a nuclear weapon? You know, it must have really pissed off the administration with even their Alinsky-style organizing tactics against Netanyahu and in favor of Herzog. They bust Arabs to the polls in Israel. I mean, does this sound familiar? And they still could not get their man elected. Don't count on the investigation going anywhere on our money flowing to these front groups. Our money, taxpayer money, through the State Department. These acorn-like front groups interfering in a democratic election with one of our only real allies in the Middle East. Oh, but the Saudis, they're our ally, aren't they? Not so. Just Google these 4 words. 4 words, Saudi war on oil. Saudi war on oil. And you'll find what's really going on with the price of oil. Our EPA, our administration, and our quote-unquote ally, the Saudis, are at war with our whole goal of U.S. energy independence. Let me repeat that. Our EPA, our administration, and our quote-unquote ally, the Saudis, are at war with our whole goal of U.S. energy independence. The thugs at the EPA want to release a torrent of new rules and regulations on frackers operating on public lands, making the process of unlocking oil and natural gas from shale even more expensive. And all the while, our quote-unquote ally, Saudi Arabia, continues to overproduce, driving down the price and driving our producers out of business. I mean, you might as well throw in the Department of Energy as well. Their sole mission is energy independence, right? Well, how's that going for us? It isn't. Oh, but for us, we've got cheap gasoline. Yeah, how long do you think that's going to last? And under this administration and the Department of Energy, our producers cannot export oil. That's right. We cannot sell one drop of crude oil on the global market, leaving the entire damn global market to the exporters of terror. I mean, screw the EPA, screw the DOE, and screw this communist Muslim conflicted entitled moron in the White House. We're not going to make it to the inauguration of a new president at this rate. And the chief negotiator in these Iran negotiations, John Kerry, this is the man who threw his medals from the Vietnam War, if he really did go over there at all, away in protest of the war. This is who we have to go head-to-head with one of the most cunning, sharpest Islamic fundamentalists, Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, who routinely yells and abuses Kerry. Kerry, the same man who said this. Play clip 4 for me, Jack.
They renounced the symbols which this country gives, and that was the medals themselves. I gave back, I can't remember, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Renounce the symbols that this country gives. This man doesn't respect the military or our country. But I guess he fits in with that regime otherwise known as the Obama administration. Anyway, Zarif, the negotiator on the Iranian side, responded to the letter that I read to you last Saturday, signed by 47 Republican senators, and tweeted this out. He tweets, "I should bring one important point to the attention of the authors, that is, the 47 senators who signed that letter last week. The world is not the United States, and the conduct of interstate relations is governed by international law, and not by U.S. domestic law. The authors may not fully understand that in international law, governments represent the entirety of their respective states, are responsible for the conduct of foreign affairs, are required to fulfill the obligations they undertake with other states, and may not invoke their internal law as justification for failure to perform their international obligations." The only thing the senators were trying to point out is that the people of this country have a right to weigh in on any treaties that our administration may or may not enter into. So all this is being negotiated by an administration that has repeatedly lied to the American public, abused and attacked the taxpayer, and continues to run roughshod over our only true ally in the region, Israel. I mean, do you remember this whopper? If you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan. You remember that one? Look, I've got good news for you. If you find your health care plan canceled or your employer dropping your plan due to the expense, or maybe you cannot afford Obamacare because your state did not set up an exchange, I have a biblical alternative. That's right. MediShare is administered by Christians, not bureaucrats. And in almost all instances, it's cheaper than paying the tax. MediShare, a program of Christian Care Ministry, is a healthcare sharing program whose members share financial resources to pay each other's medical expenses. MediShare isn't insurance. Resources are shared directly between members. I want you to listen to this. Members of healthcare sharing ministries like MediShare comply with the Affordable Care Act and do not have to purchase health insurance or pay a penalty. Again, in most cases, it may be cheaper than paying the tax. Of course, that depends upon your income. Since 1993, Medi-Share members have shared more than $682 million in medical expenses. And because of its large network of providers, members have saved an additional $295 million in medical costs. Medi-Share was designed for Christians who agree on a specific set of biblical values and lifestyles. Look, our country still self-identifies as 80% Christian, regardless of the desires of the administration and those on the left. Go to mychristiancare.org, mychristiancare.org, or you can call them, 800-772-5623, 800-772-5623. Just tell them Forrest Wilson sent you. And I want you to know I am on a crusade to show the people an option to the government-run healthcare system. This program is not sponsored by Medi-Share. In other words, this radio broadcast. Nor am I formally associated with Medi-Share. I just believe in this ministry and have decided to promote the freedom from oppression this program offers. You know, as in opposition to the Affordable Health Care Act, I spoke out against it. I helped run a candidate in the 2010 campaign to unseat Corrine Brown, a useful idiot of the Democrat left. And I found myself in 4 simultaneous audits of my business. We are in serious trouble in this country. And I sincerely want to see this oppression offered by socialized medicine stopped. And this is a viable alternative. Look, I helped get somebody signed up today, and that's one less statistic for Obamacare. If you want me to come speak to your group or congregation on the benefits of Medi-Share, you can contact me here through the station. You can call the station, or just go to wethepeople1787.org, wethepeople1787.org. By the way, up on that site, in 2014, I get a call. I wasn't going to do another radio show. I had done one before and found myself just literally targeted by our government. And, you know, like most people, I couldn't believe it. It just, so much just happened to me during that year that I really came to an awakening that we are living in a time when the United States government simply cannot be trusted. We can't trust the people in elected power. Although there are many good men and women in government, there are many good men and women in working in government, not as elected officials, but just working a job. But the people in power in this country are being funded by some evil sources, and I truly believe that we have got to stand up to this, or else we'll get more of the same. And it just, during that year, it occurred to me that I have got to get back on my feet and stand up against the government, this unconstitutional government, this lying government, this government that is attempting to oppress the American people and take freedom away. When I return, I've got a fascinating guest who's been on the show before and has become a good friend, Mr. Lowell Ponte. He co-authored with monetary expert Craig R. Smith 5 books. Latest book, Don't Bank on It, The Unsafe World of 21st Century Banking. I want you to stay tuned because I want you to hear what he has to say. You're listening to AM 600, FM 100.3, WBOB. This is The Resistance. Forrest Wilson. I'll be right back.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here's Forrest.
You know, earlier in the broadcast, we were talking about a fatwa, and our supreme leader in his address to the people of Iran and the Iranian leadership made this. I want you to hear this clip again. Play clip 2, Jack.
Our negotiations have made progress, but gaps remain. And there are people in both our countries and beyond who oppose a diplomatic resolution. My message to you, the people of Iran, is that together we have to speak up for the future we seek. As I've said many times before, I believe that our countries should be able to resolve this issue peacefully with diplomacy. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has issued a fatwa against the development of nuclear weapons.
Okay, stop it right there. So, and again, according to the Islam Supreme Council, you might compare a fatwa to the legal ruling of a high court or the Supreme Court, depending upon the authority of the mufti behind it. However, a fatwa is not binding, as is the verdict of the secular courts. While correct and applicable to all members of the Muslim faith, the fatwa is optional for the individual to respect or not. I want to bring in my friend Lowell Ponte. He is a co-author with Craig R. Smith of 5 books. The latest book, Don't Bank on It, The Unsafe World of 21st Century Banking. And I've got author and columnist, futurist, and former editor of Reader's Digest, Mr. Lowell Ponte. Lowell, how are you? Welcome back to The Resistance.
Boris, always wonderful to be on with you. Yes, I'm glad you're celebrating Happy Nowruz.
Yeah, Happy Nowruz. I was unaware of it.
New Year. This goes back 3,000 years, long before Islam, to the days when they did fire worship in Persia, and some branches of the greater Persian community still celebrate with fire worship.
Boy, we're going to get fire worship if Iran gets a nuclear weapon. We're going to have smoking cities.
This fatwa. A few minor footnotes on it. Number one, scholars have asked for a copy of the fatwa. Iran takes fatwas seriously. They do publish them. This fatwa has never been published.
Does it exist?
That's the question. I mean, he's talking about it, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything at all. However, even if it did, you have to understand they have certain religious doctrines, especially under Shiite Islam, doctrines with names like al-Taqiyya, Idtirar, Kitman, Hiyal. What they come down to, bottom line, is you as a Shiite Muslim have the right, indeed the duty, to lie to defend and advance the Islamic faith. You are allowed to sign false treaties with the enemy or with infidels. You are allowed to tell any lie needed to advance the cause of Islam. The only limitation is a treaty cannot be for more than 10 years' duration, and you can then break it. Well, you can break it at any time, because it, after all, is just a deception document. But it cannot go beyond 10 years, even to fool the enemy. Interestingly, how long is the document Barack Obama is negotiating? Why, 10 years.
Yeah.
If he were simply to ask them, let's extend the term of this to 11 years, they would then have to reject it, because that is not permitted under their deliberate deception doctrine.
So
that would be an interesting test to begin with. But we're in other words, negotiating with people to whom they believe they have a license to lie, a right to lie when negotiating with someone like Obama. And therefore, any treaty they sign, any agreement they make is meaningless.
And you've got 2 presidents, the prior president, Ahmadinejad, a believer in the 12th Imam, and believing that somehow he has a position in bringing forth this 12th Imam. And then you've got President Rouhani, who was in exile with none other than the former Ayatollah Khomeini, who really started the whole Islamic revolution in the Middle East. Is that correct?
There have been attempts to have Islamic revolution for a long time. They go back into the 50s and before. But the idea, and then there's always been an Islamist element within Islam who want to see the faith treated as a political ideology more than a religion. But no, the difficulty is when you're dealing with any of those people, they have one objective. They have a view of the world in which the entire world is divided into only 2 parts. Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb. Dar al-Islam means the part of the world already ruled by Islam. Dar al-Harb is the house of war. In other words, where war is ongoing, leading inevitably to the takeover of Islam. So their objective in everything they do as Islamists is to conquer the world. You mentioned 12ers, however. This is even scarier, because their doctrine is that by starting a massive war in the Middle East or elsewhere, they can bring about, they can literally incarnate the Mahdi, the long-expected one who is destined to bring the final triumph of Islam in the world by fire and sword. And they also have no fear of death, ultimately, because they believe when they die as martyrs, they will have not only the 72 virgin women in heaven, they will also, according to the Hadith, the oral teaching of the Prophet, they will have, for their sexual gratification, young boys with skin like pearls. This is part of their heaven, alongside the rivers of wine, even though drinking wine is forbidden in this world. It's quite okay. It'll be just fine to drink wine and be with the young boys when you're in heaven.
Please give me...
So this is who you're looking at across the negotiating table. Now, as to yelling at Kerry, have you ever studied Kerry's history politically? Do people realize that John Kerry, when he was the presidential candidate, went to Michigan, most Islamic state in the United States, and gave a speech, supposedly privately only to an Islamic group, saying he condemned Israel's security wall and roundly condemned Israel. Oh, also, there's a man named Nassan Namazi with very deep connections to Hillary Clinton and John Kerry, who is the Iranian money go-between to the Democratic Party.
Well, let's get into that, Lowell. We got to take a short break. Can you hold over and let's continue the conversation? We're listening to The Resistance, and Mr. Lowell Ponte, co-author with monetary expert Craig R. Smith of 5 books. The latest book, Don't Bank on It. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. You're listening to The Resistance, AM 600, FM 100.3.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here's Forrest.
Okay, we're back. We're talking to Lowell Ponte, author, columnist, futurist, and former editor for Reader's Digest. Lowell, you were talking about the connections with the Democrat Party. Continue, please.
Oh, sure. When John Kerry was running for president, he received at least $180,000 from Nassan Namazi. Namazi is an Iranian-American investor. He also donated $250,000 to Al Gore.
He must have wanted Al Gore elected.
The biggest middlemen between the Iranian regime channeling money to Democratic candidates here in the U.S. So Kerry isn't going to mind too much being yelled at. After all, he's received nearly $250,000 just from one Iranian channel donor, and God knows there are many more. There's a reason why Hillary Clinton doesn't want her private emails read, and part of it involves channeling a great deal of money from Arab oil powers around the world. And in this case, of course, Iran is not Arab. Iran is Persian. They're very deeply offended if you call them Arab.
But they're Shia, aren't they? They're not Sunni.
No, that's right. They are Shia.
So they're sworn enemies of Sunnis.
Well, yes and no. They do not hesitate to work together against a common enemy. For example, you see the Islamists being funded in the Gaza Strip. They're funded by both Sunni and Iranian interests because they're working to help overthrow Israel. So don't assume that there's an absolute iron line between the two.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend?
Well, as Benjamin Netanyahu in his speech tried to remind us, you have to assume that the enemy of your enemy is also your enemy in the Middle East. You also have to assume, as Israelis are wont to say, that they're either at your feet or at your throat. They're either at your feet because they recognize your power, or they're at your throat if you appear weak. And God knows Barack Obama right now appears appallingly weak and unwilling to act. And that puts you in a very vulnerable position in the Middle East. The Middle East is not a pleasant neighborhood necessarily to live in. You survive by strength, and the Israelis have learned that the hard way over thousands of years. So what we saw with Benjamin Netanyahu is a recognition that we now have a president in the United States. Oh, by the way, you notice the media didn't even identify Netanyahu except as a politician. Benjamin Netanyahu was a commando in the Israeli Defense Forces. Benjamin Netanyahu was wounded 3 times fighting terrorism. Benjamin Netanyahu's brother, Yanni, led the Israeli commandos who successfully rescued skyjacked Israelis in Uganda, in Entebbe, Uganda, but who died himself, shot by an Islamist sniper in the process. So Benjamin Netanyahu understands the price to be paid there. And he's, of course, had to fight against Hamas from Gaza and others who are armed with Iranian weapons and money. So, yes, he understands what's at stake. He also understands that Iran is acquiring ballistic missiles, yes, but if they have nuclear weapons, they can also use terrorists as a delivery system. That the next 9/11 attack on New York City may not just be with airliners taking down a couple of buildings, it may be with terrorists with a nuclear device turning Manhattan into a radioactive hole in the ground, or Washington, D.C. into a radioactive hole in the ground. So all of us are at risk, and what you learn very quickly when you've spent time as a journalist in Israel, as I have, is that we are all Israelis now. Maybe it was unusual to think of terrorists coming at you with bombs and so on 40 years ago when I began reporting from the Middle East. But today, you and I are just as subject to that kind of threat. And Israel is only the little devil. From their point of view in the Islamic world, we are the big devil.
The great Satan.
The great Satan. And we will be the ones attacked next, indeed, if not. So in other words, once you have a radioactive world like that, look, suppose Iran is allowed by Obama to acquire nuclear weapons, as appears to be the case. What will that do? Well, to begin with, that means that Saudi and every other prosperous Sunni power in the world is going to have to acquire nuclear weapons to balance that. They cannot allow Iran to be nuclear when they are not. And by the way, Iran already has much bigger borders than are being depicted. Iran has just effectively taken over Yemen through surrogates, for example. Iran right now has 20,000 troops or more, elite troops, fighting in Iraq. That's what is holding the Islamic State, the Sunni Islamic State, at bay, is 20,000 Iranian troops. In other words, we've already had the Anschluss, in which Nazi Germany marched into Austria and just took it over one day, with scarcely a shot fired. The Shiite majority government in Iraq already let down its borders and allowed basically a very sizable Iranian army to come into their country. There's no indication that that Iranian army is ever going to leave voluntarily.
Well, and look what we did under a former administration, when several administrations ago, when Iraq went into Kuwait. I mean, we formed a coalition, we went to war, and got Saddam Hussein to leave Kuwait. There has been little to no mention of that. I mean, there's been some, but none officially out of the White House as to
well, it's always useful on occasion to go back and remember the true locus of evil in the modern world, too. And that you mentioned him in passing, Jimmy Carter. It was Jimmy Carter who, in the name of his own twisted idea of civil rights, withdrew U.S. support from the Shah of Iran, our faithful ally there. But when the Shah of Iran toppled, that's what opened the way to this 14th century theocratic regime of twelvers, of people who literally want to bring in global doomsday as the rulers of Iran, and they are rushing as fast as they can to acquire nuclear weapons to help make that possible. That would not have happened without Jimmy Carter. He did it in the name of 3,000 political prisoners the Shah was holding, all of whom apparently were Soviet agents that had come across Iran's northern border. Were they being tortured? Yes, they were. No doubt about that. The Shah was in many ways a brutal leader. He was also a leader who extended rights to women, something no previous leader there had done. And that was really what offended a lot of the Iranian mullahs more than anything else, that the Shah was westernizing the country and providing human rights and moving away from the weirdest strictures of Sharia law. So that brought down the Shah. What did that do? Well, that led to the Iran-Iraq War, something that never would have happened had the Shah still been in power. In the Iran-Iraq War, more than 500,000 people died, and you saw the rise of Saddam Hussein to having the fourth largest military in the world, as we had to counter the then theocratic Iranian threat. Oh, by the way, the 3,000 people being tortured, they were taken out by the Ayatollah Khomeini, lined up against a wall and shot. That's the human rights that Jimmy Carter gave them. And then the Soviets invaded Afghanistan on the other side of Iran, assuming that it was weak enough that they could seize that territory, Ultimately, they couldn't because we helped mobilize a great number of Islamist or Islamic groups to fight against them. And we armed them with enough weapons, Stinger missiles and the like, that we could overcome whatever advantage the Soviets might have had. One of those groups, by the way, was Al-Qaeda. And so we actually helped create Al-Qaeda as a serious fighting guerrilla force in the world. Al-Qaeda, of course, would later bring down the World Trade Centers and send a plane into the Pentagon here. So all these things, including the 9/11 attacks, ultimately trace back to Jimmy Carter. These things would not have happened without his intervention. This is the same Jimmy Carter who Clinton sent to negotiate nuclear matters with North Korea, and Jimmy Carter totally violated all of Clinton's orders and directives and negotiated a very favorable agreement that helped North Korea go nuclear.
It sounds like we're just repeating the same mistakes of the past.
And now we have Barack Obama in the same tradition. By the way, both Jimmy Carter and Barack Obama were given the Nobel Peace Prize to reward the fact. Jimmy Carter, after all, probably only had the blood of 1 million people on his hands by the time they gave him that award. Barack Obama, we know from the procedures used by the Peace Prize Committee, which is not actually part of the rest of the Nobel establishment. They're a totally different thing in a different country. But we know that Barack Obama was awarded or chosen to receive the Nobel Peace Prize no later than his 11th day as president. It had to be done in his first 11 days. That's when the selection was made. So that you see how much accomplishment Barack Obama had been able to do in just 11 days or less as president.
You know, it's amazing that the administration knows this history. They know the stakes. Are they just negotiating to negotiate? I mean, they already know what the outcome's going to be, it looks like.
Well, we're dealing with a strange kind of mental instability, I hate to say, in the president. Let me give you a couple of examples. Barack Obama believes that you should not be allowed to have a .22 caliber plinking rifle, or that your wife should be allowed to have a .38 caliber handgun to protect herself against 250-pound rapists, an equalizer for women. That should all be forbidden to law-abiding Americans. Yet Barack Obama sees nothing wrong with letting the crazies who govern Iran get nuclear weapons. What kind of mental juxtaposition is that? Apparently, from at least two reliable sources, there's now indication that in 2014 and perhaps earlier, the Barack Obama administration threatened Israel that if they attempted, so much as attempted, to preempt Iran's nuclear program with an attack, as had been done with the Osirak reactor in Iraq and elsewhere, that the U.S. warplanes and missiles would shoot down Israeli jets on the way to attack Iran.
Yeah, and
I mean, this is not. And when Barack Obama became president, the U.S. already had an agreement. We were going to put anti-missile systems into Poland. Why? To threaten the Soviet or Russia? No. We wouldn't have enough anti-missiles to stop a Russian attack. Those missiles were being put in to stop Iranian ballistic missiles from being thrown at the United States and Europe.
And Lowell, the optics of all this, while these negotiations are going on,
but understand, Barack Obama negated that deal. He stopped that from happening, leaving the U.S. vulnerable to Iranian missiles. Now, what kind of mindset does that? I mean, we're dealing with someone who is either he is mentally unstable or he is himself not just a closet Muslim, but a 12er. Maybe Barack Obama also believes the Mahdi will come. His middle name is, after all, Hussein.
Yeah.
His father was a Muslim. His stepfather in Indonesia was a Muslim. He was himself registered as a Muslim as a child in Indonesia, the largest Muslim population country on earth, where I've spent quite a bit of time, actually. He, to this day, says the most beautiful sound in the world is the Muslim call to prayer from the minaret at sunset. He may not really be a Muslim, but he is certainly deeply sympathetic to Islam.
Can you imagine the embarrassment? And there was absolutely no or any type of commentary on it, but while these negotiations are going on, about 2 weeks ago, they had a mock-up of a carrier sitting there with Iranian missiles attacking it, and it was obviously a U.S. carrier. And then they're burning Obama in effigy in the streets in Tehran. Just to me, I would have at least addressed that with the American people, because the optics of that are really bad against these negotiations. It does not look good for us, in other words.
Oh, absolutely. Now, President Obama has, through intermediaries, said we will, of course, never permit Iran to get nuclear weapons. Well, Mr. President, if it comes right down to it, and the only way you can do that is to preemptively attack Iran, are you prepared to do that, yes or no? The President will not answer that question. But that may ultimately be the only way to do it. Oh, I forgot to mention, when I was talking about Mr. Namazi, during the Clinton administration, Hillary Clinton, at a 1998 White House gathering, embraced Mr. Namazi in the White House and praised him. This, by the way, after the Clinton administration had just made him their select ambassador to Argentina, which is interesting. The Senate refused to approve him. They considered him a very bad choice.
Lowell, I want to hold you over one more time. This information is so important, what you're saying and what's getting out on this broadcast. And I got a few more questions for you when we come back. Can you stay over for one more break?
Absolutely.
Excellent. You're listening to Forrest Wilson and the Resistance. We've got Lowell Ponte, author, columnist, futurist. I want you to hear what he has to say. Stay tuned. AM 600, FM 100.3. We'll be right back.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here's Forrest.
We're back. We're talking with Lowell Ponte, author, columnist, futurist, and former editor for Reader's Digest. His recent book with Craig R. Smith, Don't Bank on It, The Unsafe World of 21st Century Banking. Lowell, I've only got a few minutes left, but I wanted to ask you this question because I think it's so important. And I think your explanation of it is so well done. But with the very existence of Israel on the line and the blatant hostility towards Israel by this administration, why do Jews in this country overwhelmingly vote Democrat and support Democrat causes?
God only knows. They do come, obviously, from an Eastern European political tradition in which socialism was viewed as the great alternative to czars and pogroms and that sort of thing. So that may be part of it. They also come from a religious doctrine that believes in generosity and sharing almost at a tribal level. They are the last of the great tribal peoples on earth that have enormous power and ability. But they need to understand now, even the Democratic Party is going anti-Semitic. The Democratic Party, well, as you see, I mean, Al Sharpton, 82 times in the White House. This is the Al Sharpton who led a rally of people chanting anti-Semitic slogans through a Jewish neighborhood, smashing windows, as they did so in New York City's own Kristallnacht. And these are the people being empowered by the Obama administration because now they can get as much in Islamic money from overseas as can Hillary Clinton, as they can get from Jewish donors here. And Muslims are starting to outnumber Jews even in the United States, thanks to the legacy of people like Henry Ford and the fact that a lot are being given open admission, even as Latinos are, by the Obama administration. So we have these problems. Then we have the recognition that in the United States, as you mentioned, a poll found that 79% of Americans profess belief in God. What percentage of American Jews do? 48%. Less than half of Jews even say they believe in God anymore at all. And of those, only 25% say they feel certain that God actually exists.
How can you be a Jew?
How can you be a Jew? And this is why a term came to my mind spontaneously. I found that a few others have used it, but it should be much more popular. It's Ginos, J-I-N-O-S, Jews in name only. Like rhinos are Republicans in name only. If you don't believe in the God of Israel, if you don't believe in God at all, you may ethnically be a Jew. Your ancestors may have been Jews. Heck, Karl Marx's ancestors were rabbis, but he became an atheist. If you give up belief in God or sincere belief in God, then are you really a Jew at all? Now, for example, Dianne Feinstein expressed deep offense at Barack Obama pretending to speak for all Jews and saying he didn't want Israel destroyed. Well, who is Dianne Feinstein? Her paternal grandparents were Polish Jews, but her maternal grandparents, and Judaism passes via the mother, not the father, were of uncertain Jewish ancestry. They can't even tell where they came from, and we know that they were members of the Russian Orthodox Church. So in other words, they were Christians. They were Christian converts like Karl Marx's parents. Feinstein herself graduated from the convent of the Sacred Heart High School in 1951. Who is Dianne Feinstein? Oh, she's the wife of Richard Blum, who was just awarded a near $1 billion contract for California's high-speed rail program and was given a near $1 billion commission program by the federal government, by the U.S. Postal Service, for his commission selling 56 postal buildings.
He's on the board of C.B. Richard
Ellis. Makes
Ellis.
tremendous amounts of money, but I'm not sure she should be calling herself a Jew.
Well, in the last 2 minutes of the show, do we have time for a caller, Lowell? I've got a caller that wants to ask a question. Let me pull him in.
Well, one thing before we do that, Forrest.
Yes.
Yes, could I just say if people would like a copy of this book,
don't
absolutely. Bank on it, be happy to give you one absolutely free and post-pay just by calling 800-630-1494. That's 1-800-630-1494. Or as I like to say, think of Columbus sailing the ocean blue in 1492, but not quite. 1-800-630-1494. We'll be happy to give you this 256-page book. We're just trying to arm people with information to save the Republic. And
okay.
You'll find this mind-boggling information. Let's go to the caller.
Yes, we only got a couple of seconds left. George, go ahead. How are you?
Pretty good. 12 countries, lived in 3 Muslim countries. You're exactly correct in everything you've said. But I wanted to add 2 things that you should do in your research. One is look up how far Pavlov in Russia came to being able to control elections. And number 2, look at the diseases that are carried to the Middle East, originally through the Silk Road, but now from places like Venezuela, Zaire, other places. And those diseases cause greed and desire to hurt others and many other neuropsychological conditions. And Obama has them. I met his father in Indonesia, his second father. He was a fairly decent guy, but his first father, his mother, and Frank...
George, we're going to have to leave it right there. Thank you for calling, Lowell. Thank you for being on the show. You've listened to The Resistance. This is Forrest Wilson. We'll be back next Saturday at the same time.